For 13 years, a serial killer dumped bodies on a stretch of Long Island beach and walked away clean every single time. Police had DNA. Police had phone records. Police had witnesses. And still, nothing. The case went cold. Families buried their daughters without answers. And then one detective followed a man to a pizza restaurant in Manhattan, waited for him to throw away his crust, and pulled it out of the trash. That pizza box cracked open 13 years of darkness. Ocean Parkway is a long flat road that runs along the southern shore of Long Island, New York. On one side is the Atlantic Ocean. On the other side is a thin strip of barrier beach called Gilgo Beach. It is quiet, isolated, the kind of place where you can drive for miles and not see another person. In December 2010, a search dog was out looking for a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert. She had disappeared after fleeing a client's house in Oak Beach in May of that same year. Investigators spread out along the brush and the scrubland near the road. They did not find Shannon Gilbert. What they found was far worse. Within days of searching that stretch of Ocean Parkway, investigators recovered the remains of 4 women. All were wrapped in burlap. All had been there for years. All were young women who had advertised escort services on Craigslist. The 4 victims became known immediately in the press as the Gilgo Four. Their names were Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. They had disappeared separately between 2007 and 2010, but the search did not stop there. Over the following weeks and months, investigators found more remains spread across the same area. A total of 11 sets of remains were eventually recovered along Ocean Parkway and nearby locations. Among them were partial remains of a woman whose skull turned up at Gilgo Beach, while her other remains had been found years earlier in Manaville, over 40 miles away. There was also a toddler, a young Asian male. Bodies dumped like garbage on the side of a road by someone who had done this many times and believed he would never be caught. For years, investigators worked under the assumption they were looking for one killer. The Long Island serial killer, or LISK, became one of the most talked about unsolved cases in American history. Rex Heuermann was born in 1964 and grew up on Long Island. He studied architecture, built a career in New York City, and eventually founded his own firm called RH Consultants and Associates. His office was in Midtown Manhattan, just a few blocks from Penn Station. He worked on real projects, real buildings. His name was on legitimate contracts. He lived in a house in Massapequa Park, a quiet suburb on Long Island, with his wife Asa Ellerup and their 2 children. He drove to work. He came home. He was, by every external measure, a completely unremarkable middle-aged man with a normal life. He was also, according to prosecutors, hunting women on the side for at least 30 years. The earliest victim prosecutors have charged him with killing is Sandra Costilla, who was 28 years old when she was murdered in 1993. That is not a typo. 1993. If the charges are correct, Rex Heuermann was killing women while Bill Clinton was in the White House, while the internet was still being born, and while his own children were growing up in the house on the quiet street in Massapequa Park. Remember that detail. His office in Midtown Manhattan. Because that is exactly where investigators were standing when he finally made his first mistake. The case that became known publicly as the Long Island serial killer investigation began officially in 2010 when the bodies were found. But it quickly became one of the most complex and frustrating cold cases in New York history. The Suffolk County Police Department took the lead. They set up a task force. They interviewed hundreds of people. They collected DNA from crime scenes. They built profiles. They chased leads that went nowhere. Then something happened that made everything worse. Rumors began circulating in the true crime community, and eventually in mainstream media, that law enforcement itself might be connected to the case. One theory pointed to a former Suffolk County police commissioner named James Burke, who was later convicted on federal charges related to a completely separate matter involving beating a man who had stolen items from his car. Burke was a corrupt official, that was proven, but his connection to the LISK case was never established. The rumors, however, damaged public trust and made the investigation even more complicated. Internet sleuths picked up where police seemed to stall. Amateur investigators created forums, websites, and social media accounts dedicated entirely to the Gilgo Beach case. They tracked phone records publicly available through court filings. They mapped the locations of victims. They built timelines. Some of them came closer to identifying a suspect than the official investigation appeared to be at certain points. Shannon Gilbert, the woman whose disappearance originally triggered the discovery of the bodies, was found dead in December 2011 in a marsh not far from where she had disappeared. Her death was ruled accidental drowning by the medical examiner, a conclusion her family disputed loudly and publicly for years. Her mother argued for a decade that Shannon was a victim of the same killer. The medical examiner maintained the drowning ruling. That dispute added another painful layer to an already broken investigation. Years passed. The task force continued working quietly. New DNA technology was developing, and somewhere in Midtown Manhattan, Rex Heuermann was going to work every day. By 2022 and into 2023, investigators from the Suffolk County District Attorney's Gilgo Beach Task Force had narrowed their focus to Rex Heuermann. They had phoned data connecting burner phones to cell towers near his office. They had behavioral patterns. They had a profile that matched, but they needed his DNA. Getting a DNA sample from a private citizen without a warrant is a legal challenge. You cannot just swab a man's mouth because you suspect him of something. But there is a legal way to obtain DNA. If a person discards something in a public place, that item and anything on it is legally abandoned property. So investigators followed Rex Heuermann. They watched him go into a pizza restaurant in Manhattan. They watched him eat. They watched him throw away his pizza box when he was done. And when he walked out the door, investigators went to that trash can and recovered the box. Rex Heuermann's saliva was on the crust. That sample went to a laboratory. Investigators compared it against DNA that had been recovered from crime scenes years earlier. The DNA from the pizza crust matched. It matched material found on the remains of victims. It matched in a way that the prosecution described as pointing to one and only one possible donor. The district attorney's office later summed it up in one sentence that became famous. Rex Heuermann may have abandoned his pizza crust, but he never abandoned all that personal information that is now our DNA. On the 13th of July, 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested outside his Manhattan office. He was taken into custody and charged with 3 counts of murder in the deaths of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. He pleaded not guilty. That pizza box cracked open 13 years. But what came next made the case even bigger than anyone expected. In January 2024, the missing piece of the Gilgo Four fell into place when he was officially charged with the murder of Maureen Brainard Barnes. Heuermann's arrest in July 2023 was just the beginning of how large this case would become. In June 2024, prosecutors charged him with 2 additional murders. Jessica Taylor was 20 years old when she disappeared in July 2003. Her partial remains were found in Manorville in 2003, but her skull was recovered at Gilgo Beach years later. The fact that her body was split between 2 locations over 40 miles apart told investigators the killer was not just dumping bodies. He was dismembering victims and distributing remains to complicate identification. Valerie Mack was also known for years as Manorville Jane Doe. She vanished in 2000. Her remains were found in Manorville in 2000, and then additional remains were later found at Gilgo Beach. She had gone unidentified for over 2 decades. Advanced DNA technology eventually gave her back her name. Heuermann was charged with her murder in December 2024. Sandra Castilla was 28 years old and was killed in 1993. Her remains were found in North Sea, far from Gilgo Beach, which complicated her connection to the case for years. Prosecutors eventually charged Heuermann with her murder as well, pushing the alleged timeline of his crimes back over 30 full years. By the time the charging was complete, Rex Heuermann was facing 7 murder charges covering victims from 1993 all the way through 2010, 17 years of alleged killing. And then came the twist that nobody expected. For over a decade, investigators and the public operated under one core assumption. One killer was responsible for all of the remains found along Ocean Parkway. The Long Island serial killer was singular, one monster, one dumping ground. That assumption was wrong. In December 2025, Nassau County District Attorney Ann Donnelly announced the arrest of Andrew Dykes, a 66-year-old Army veteran who had been living in Ruskin, Florida. Dykes was charged with the 1997 murder of Tanya Denise Jackson, known in the case files for years as Peaches. Jackson had been listed among the possible Gilgo Beach victims for over a decade. Her toddler daughter was found alongside her remains. Dykes was linked to the killing through DNA evidence. He was arrested at his home in Florida on the 3rd of December 2025, extradited to New York, and arraigned on a charge of second-degree murder on the 18th of December 2025. This arrest shattered the single killer theory completely. Gilgo Beach was not one killer's dumping ground. It was a remote, isolated, desolate stretch of road that at least 2 different predators used independently during the same era. Rex Heuermann was allegedly hunting victims using burner phones and a methodical approach, targeting women who advertised escort services online. Andrew Dykes was operating separately, connected to Jackson through completely different evidence and circumstances. 2 killers, same beach, same years, neither knew about the other. The Dykes arrest did one more important thing. It cleared Heuermann of the Peaches case and the Baby Doe case, streamlining what prosecutors need to prove at trial. 7 victims, 7 charges, 1 trial. When Rex Heuermann was arrested in July 2023, his wife Asa Ellerup was out of town. She had no idea what was happening. She came home to investigators processing her house for evidence. Her marriage of 29 years was over the moment. Her husband was put in handcuffs. Ellerup filed for divorce shortly after the arrest. She said publicly through her attorney that she had a difficult time believing the man she had been married to for nearly 3 decades was capable of committing these crimes. But there was something she could not explain away. Prosecutors revealed that hair samples belonging to Asa Ellerup and the couple's daughter Victoria were found on some of the victims. Not at the crime scenes themselves, but on the victims' bodies. The prosecution's theory was that stray hairs from inside the Heuermann home were transferred to the bodies through contact with Heuermann himself. He allegedly brought hairs from his own house and family onto the women he killed. Ellerup's attorney confirmed that the fact her hair was found on victims made the process especially painful for her. She described it as deeply disturbing and said it made her need closure even more urgently than before. Victoria Heuermann, Rex's daughter, took a position her mother could not bring herself to take. She said publicly that she believes her father is most likely the Gilgo Beach serial killer. A daughter sitting in a courtroom watching proceedings against the man who raised her, believing he is guilty of murdering 7 women. Both Asa Ellerup and Victoria Heuermann have attended court proceedings. Their attorney confirmed they plan to attend all hearings. They want this resolved. One way or another, a wife who cannot believe it, a daughter who does, a murder manifesto in the attic, and a trial set to begin in September 2026. Here is exactly where the case stands right now. On the 13th of January, 2026, Rex Heuermann appeared in court in Riverhead, New York. The judge set the trial to begin right after Labor Day in September 2026. The judge used specific words, "Come hell or high water." That trial is happening. Several enormous legal battles have already been decided. Just before the trial date was set, the defense dropped a massive 1978-page motion, attempting to pin the murder of Sandra Castilla on another convicted Long Island serial killer, John Bittroff, throwing a wild new layer of reasonable doubt into the courtroom. The defense tried to split the 7 murder cases into separate trials. They argued that the methods used in each killing were different enough that a jury could not fairly evaluate each case individually if all 7 were presented together. The judge denied that motion in September 2025. All 7 murders will be tried together in one single trial. The defense tried to exclude the DNA evidence obtained through whole genome sequencing. This technology looks at 100,000 or more points of comparison in a hair sample. Traditional DNA testing looks at only 15 to 24 points. The defense called it unreliable and referred to it as magic science. The judge allowed it twice, once in September 2025 and a second time after the defense filed another challenge. This will be the first time whole genome sequencing evidence has ever been admitted in a New York State criminal trial. The defense is now challenging 20 search warrants. They are also arguing that the pizza crust DNA collection violated Heuermann's constitutional right to privacy. The argument is that although the crust was thrown in a public trash can, Heuermann never intended to abandon his personal genetic information along with it. Legal experts consider this argument extremely difficult to win, given established case law around abandoned property. Heuermann remains in the Riverhead Correctional Facility in protective solitary confinement. He is allowed out of his cell for 1 hour per Dalton Y. He has access to the law library and can receive visits from family members. He has maintained his not guilty plea across all 7 charges. His attorney Michael Brown has said clearly there will be no plea deal. Heuermann wants a trial. He is, according to Brown, a patient man who is eager to have his day in court. The prosecution says they are ready. Prosecutors certified in late 2025 that they had turned over all evidence to the defense, including a 723-page inventory and a complete list of potential witnesses. They are not waiting. 7 women, 7 families, 30 years of alleged killing, and the whole thing came down to a man throwing away his lunch. Melissa Barthélemy was 24 years old. Megan Waterman was 22. Amber Lynn Costello was 27. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was 25. Jessica Taylor was 20. Valerie Mack was 24. Sandra Castilla was 28. These were not just names attached to a case file. They were daughters and sisters and mothers whose families spent years without answers, without closure, without even knowing what happened to the people they loved. Some of those families waited over 30 years. Sandra Castilla was killed in 1993. The people who loved her waited over 3 decades to hear her name. Rex Heuermann sat across the table from those families in courtrooms in 2024 and 2025 in his prison clothes and said nothing. His attorney said not guilty. The families sat and watched. The September 2026 trial will be one of the most watched criminal proceedings in American history. 7 murders. Whole genome sequencing being used for the first time in New York State Court. A murder manifesto. Hair from a killer's own family found on the bodies of his victims. Burner phones. A taunting caller who called a dead woman's sister from a cell tower near his own office. And a pizza box pulled from a trash can in Midtown Manhattan. 13 years. 11 sets of remains. 2 separate killers, using the same stretch of isolated beach. 1 arrest that came not from a sophisticated surveillance operation or a high-tech forensic breakthrough. but from a detective watching a man eat lunch and waiting for him to finish. Rex Heuermann threw away his crust, and with it, he threw away everything.